So, good afternoon, all of you. When it comes to numbers as a topic, and I guess most of you are restless because I'm standing between you and the lunch. So I'll try and keep it very simple. Already I've got 5 minutes deducted from my allocated 25 minutes, but I don't think I'll take that much. So the focus is that we've been, I've been part of this conference, and I've been, since morning, I've been listening to speakers. So you've been talking about what happens once the customer comes to your clinic and starts the procedure. So being one of these bad guys, we are not going to, saving lives, we're actually going to talk about money. So the unethical marketing guy is basically trying to tell you here is that how do you get those people to come to your clinic and get the treatment done. So yeah, so that's broadly the plan. So what we are going to talk about today, and what I thought would be the theme of the talk today, is going to how do you communicate to your audience what they are looking for. And that's very important because we marketing people feel that a lot happens as far as the communication is concerned. Now what makes this effective, and how do you know your customers? So the next example that I'm going to share with you might be extremely frivolous for some of you. You might think that, why am I even talking about this here? So what do we see here? We are talking about a product which is fairly common in India, a product that supposedly makes you fairer, makes you more desirable, and makes you more acceptable. And if you look at the product itself, it's like any medical product that most of us tend to think when you are technical people. I used to be an engineer at one point in time and would solve every problem technically. But if you look at this product, the product is essentially not just a cream that is there inside a tube. What do you think it's selling? In India, if you understand, it's been long there, and you can obviously realize looking at me, I have not used that cream. Otherwise, things would have been better. But for most, we've been born saying that if you're dark, then the future is equally darker. And usually, 30 years back, women would not even get married. They would not become air hostesses because they had a darker skin. And then suddenly all of this changed, and today we are talking about a case where if you use Fair and Lovely, you basically at least get to be equal as your male counterpart. You can tell your father that he has to wait for another 3 years before you get married. But what is this product about? So this product is not about sun protection factor or skin protection factor. It's about giving an inferiority complex to people and then addressing it through a solution. So this product is about hope to many people, for giving them a career, for giving them a life, and respect in the society, for being fair. I know it's extremely unfair, but that's how it is. So you are actually, perhaps, when you talk about what you're offering to your potential customers, your patients, I know that you'd hate calling them customers, but I have to call them customers. So are you offering merely assisted conception? And I picked this up only recently. Now, you're actually offering something else. You're offering, if you look at the ladies of this particular country, if they are not able to conceive, that's a taboo. They're supposed to be, infertile, and that, has its own social implications for that. And essentially, if you see, then you're actually offering the same things that this product offers to its customers. Same confidence and same hope that when they thought that nothing would actually work out for them. So you have to come from that understanding of your patients that they're coming to you as a last resort when the biological systems do not really work, and in some way, as Dr. Woodward pointed out, that in some way we kind of play God and make this patients conceive. So what we are giving them, we are basically giving them hope. So this is the first level. So one has to understand that from the customer's point of view, actually you're offering hope to your customers. Now, how do you communicate this? Now, many a times we actually go wrong in terms of how do we structure this whole thought process. And I know that as doctors, this is not your job. But what I want you to perhaps appreciate is that when you plan out your marketing plan, and most of you have clinics and most of you trying to do something in terms of marketing, reaching out to your customers, you have to find out who is the best provider of this particular service, going by some of these frameworks. So we are not basically saying that, all of a sudden, all of you turn marketeers, and then, take up our own business. But we would want to protect our own turf and say that, okay, as doctors, you just have to understand and appreciate whether you're going right or wrong overall. But obviously, I saw one of the providers is actually providing digital marketing services as well for this particular conference. So if you see, the first thing you have to know is that who you're focusing your communication on. Who are your target patients? Who are your target customers? What kind of problems do they come with? And the next one is that what is the objective of this one? What is the, what do you need to communicate to them? Are you communicating hope? And this is where the problem comes, is many of these cases what we see is that because being doctors, being technically much more qualified than we are, you come across with a very technical message for your customers, which they perhaps don't understand. And that's why the communication objective also has to be set in terms of saying that, what do you want to communicate? Are you communicating that, hope? Are you trying to say that, everybody could potentially, conceive? And how realistically is it possible? So, recently we had experience, one of my friends actually opted for IVF and IUI, and they went through the whole process. And they were kind of convinced at one point in time that anything can happen. And later on they realized that a pragmatic approach is to basically forego this thing because, the person was, the lady was too old and she could not have conceived at all. So sometimes you need to basically understand what is the communication that you want to give, how much of hope do you want to give your customers. And then finally, what is that you intend to tell them as far as the logically, it is connected. And then next, this is where people tend to kind of make those small mistakes, and this is what we call as the implementation part. The first one was largely in terms of how do you plan broadly your strategy in terms of, okay, sorry for using the wrong word, strategy, but yeah, how do you plan your overall thing? But this is more about how you actually get down to doing this thing. So what is the channel that you're going to select? Are you going to do it online? Are you going to do it offline? Are you going to do it in the traditional way in terms of advertisements, in terms of direct mailers, going into hospitals where people have come for diagnostics tests and then following it up with some brochures and stuff, mailers? Or are you going to do it online? Because online, is one of these things, and this is where I'll spend a little bit more time in terms of exploring the possible options that you can actually look as doctors, because you are technically qualified. What you need is basically the technical know-how as far as how do you do digital marketing to a large extent. Now, how much do you want to spend? And that's a big question. Often we do not know how much we have to spend because we do not have an inkling of what we intend to do. But what we are providing you here is that if you answer this question that I put forth in this presentation, from the very first one in terms of who are your customers, what is the message, what that you want to tell them, and what is the kind of channel that you're going to select, I think many of these questions would be answered in terms of how much should you actually spend for this effort. And finally, one thing that no marketer also wants to touch, and no marketing manager is expected to deliver on this one, is that how do I measure my effectiveness? It's almost that return on investment, that I spent this much money. How much did I get in terms of number of customers, a number of queries or something? So this is where it becomes very interesting. Because as any marketing activity or as any communication activity, you should also know that how successful you were. And this is where the measurement problem comes in, that if you know what you want to measure, you can always measure it. But most of the times you do not know what you want to measure and therefore never get a measurement or a metric out of it. So quickly, let me get into the meat of the presentation that I have, just 2 slides and I think it will be done. So the digital media, as we see, provides enormous amount of opportunities. Now everybody, I could see that once I came in, I saw that most of you are on mobile phones, using data in terms of internet, WhatsApp, whatnot, Facebook. So we see a lot of opportunity here in terms of how you reach out to your customers. One of the good ways of doing this is through social media networks. I've seen barely a few, but mostly I've seen international ads featuring on social media networks. We do not see too many Indian, but we see a lot of trichology and hair removal and hair implantation ads coming up on social media. We do not see that much on artificial insemination, IVF and stuff. Why? I do not know whether there's a medical rule prohibiting that or so, but you could possibly explore. Now, I'm not even saying advertising your services, but you can do it much more, gently. And how we can do that is perhaps something you can actually start posting pages on WebMD. WebMD is one of these things that people actually consult quite a bit, because I remember my wife, at least, even when she had a normal headache, she would go back and come back and tell me, maybe I think I have a cancer. So most people today, I think, by virtue of the knowledge on the internet, have some sort of cancer. So that's because of WebMD. So therefore, it is true that people are actually looking at technical sites and actually trying to get information. So people are seeking out information. And why is digital marketing so very important and so very interesting is that contrary to everywhere, if you see traditional advertising where it happens on television, it happens on newspaper and so on, so it is a kind of push from the advertiser or the marketer onto the customer. So it's an imposition on the personal space, and the customer or the patient is kind of overwhelmed by the amount of material that he or she receives. But here, you see that your digital presence makes sure that the customer actually comes to you. So there is a much more customer readiness or a buyer readiness as far as the communication that he or she is going to receive. And that's the beauty of digital media. That it's almost like what you say as pull rather than the push happening in this case. Microblogging. I do not know how many doctors actually resort to this microblogging kind of a thing, because when you have these interesting studies, like many of you had presented, I was looking at Dr. Dar's presentation, and then I looked at Dr. Udud's presentation. Many of these things, you do not need to really share the article, but you can share those key highlights and kind of curate information and provide this information to customers. And then finally, what we can possibly do is use search engine optimization, what we call as SEO and SEM. Now, why is it required and what are these terms? I'll just briefly tell you, is that search engine optimization is a technique that how do I bring traffic to my own website? I do that by putting those keywords. So we know that when you go to Google, you search for keywords. We are trying to search for something, right? So when I do a search engine optimization, I basically bring traffic to my website by making sure that my website has those keywords planted in very strategic locations, and my website basically delivers on the promise of providing this information to my potential viewers. So many, and if you see Google, and everybody searches on Google, and Google has a very clever mechanics in terms of, and it's a kind of very complicated thing, they have crawlers and spiders that kind of go through every website to look at every website, and then search for these pages. And what they do is basically, now that they know that your website has those pages or details, they will basically isolate your websites and pick them up on the search engine. So whenever you search, you will see that your site comes up as one of the search results. And the other option is search engine marketing, that and this is on top of search engine optimization. Do not even try to look for search engine marketing without even doing your SEO at first. And what does search engine marketing do? It basically says that whenever Google is, now we search on Google, we see that some of these sites come on top and which have got an ad written on them. So how do I make sure that I get into paying that extra bit of money to Google to make sure that I'm there on that ad? Why? Because it is known that people usually click on one of these ads that come up on the top. So you have to be one of the top 3 which are appearing on any page. And that's why there's a fight and there's a kind of bidding process and there's an auction that goes on every day on Google in terms of who's going to take up those keywords. So it's very imperative that, as doctors, as technically qualified people who are offering a great service to the population, actually use some of these marketing techniques to reach out to your patients and provide them with the hope. So I try to keep it as short as possible. Hope it made sense, and hope you will get to use some of it. Thank you so much.